Get away from us. Min-Suk stayed on his knees. Rain hammered the concrete of Terminal 4, soaking through his $1,000 suit, plastering his hair to his forehead, and he didn't move. Didn't rise. Didn't let his alpha instincts override what his pride had finally, devastatingly learned. Before him, Jaewon stood trembling. Not from cold, but from 3 years of buried rage and fresh terror. His omega scent spiked sharp with panic, lavender curdling into something acrid and defensive. Behind Jaewon's legs, a small boy in a yellow raincoat clutched his father's hand, storm-gray eyes, Min-Suk's eyes, wide with confusion. Jaewon. His voice cracked. The head of Korea's most feared security empire, reduced to rubble. Please. You threw me out. Jaewon's hands shook as he pulled their son closer. Asterisk, you threw us out. Asterisk. Min-Suk tilted his head back, exposing his throat. The rain streaked down the column of his neck, bearing the scent gland, that sacred, vulnerable place where an omega's bite could claim or condemn. It was the ultimate submission. An alpha on his knees, throat bared in the rain, was a creature stripped of every weapon. I know. The words tasted like blood. I know what I did. I know what I believed. And I know, his voice splintered. I know I don't deserve this. But he does. The boy whimpered. Jaewon's eyes glistened, fury and anguish warring across his face. His hand twitched toward the bus ticket crumpled in his pocket. The one-way escape that would take Min-Suk's son to a country with no extradition, no claim, no second chances. Give me one reason, Jaewon whispered. Why I shouldn't get on that bus and make sure you never find us again. Min-Suk's throat worked. His alpha roared. His pride bled out into the rain. And he had only the truth left. Before I tell you what happened to her, subscribe to Heartverse BL, and comment where you're watching from. Min-Suk cut through Gangnam Station to avoid the press gauntlet waiting outside his office tower. Thursday evening crush. Thousands of bodies pressed into artificial light and recycled air. The white noise of humanity he'd trained himself to filter into irrelevance. His phone buzzed. Kongdae's message flashed across the screen. Reporters staked at West Exit. Suggest secondary route. He pocketed the device and descended the stairs toward line 2, his security detail a shadow 3 paces behind. The suppressants were holding. They always held. For pills this morning, 2 at lunch, his body a chemistry experiment he controlled with the same ruthless precision he applied to hostile acquisitions. Then the air changed. It wasn't dramatic. Not at first. Just a fractional shift. A tendril of scent that threaded through the station's stale recycled atmosphere and hooked directly into the brainstem below conscious thought. Lavender. Min-Suk stopped walking. His security detail nearly collided with him. Sir. Sunwarm honey. An undertone of something else, something new and primal that made his hindbrain snap to attention with feral, violent recognition. Milk scent. Sir, are you? Quiet. His alpha clawed through 3 years of chemical suppression like a drowning man breaking the surface. The suppressants didn't fail, they shattered. His vision sharpened. His hearing filtered out the crowd's noise and zeroed in on a sound 10 meters ahead. A child's bright laughter, high and unguarded. Min-Suk's head turned. The crowd parted. There. A small boy in a yellow raincoat, no more than 3 years old, stumbled over his own feet and caught himself on an adult's leg. He looked up and Min-Suk's heart stopped. The face was his own. Softened by puppy fat, yes, but unmistakable. The sharp jawline that would cut angles in another decade. The serious set of the mouth, and those eyes. Storm gray. Mercury silver. Alpha eyes that pulsed with a dominance the child was years from understanding. Yama, look. The big stairs. Min-Suk's gaze dragged upward. Jaewon stood 3 meters away, his hand wrapped protectively around the boy's small fingers. He wore a faded coat Min-Suk didn't recognize, his hair longer than he'd kept it during their marriage, and his scent, God, his scent was a knife straight through the chest. Lavender and honey, now laced with exhaustion and the unmistakable pheromone signature of an omega who'd nursed a pup. Their eyes met. Jaewon's face drained of color. His scent spiked, pure liquid terror. No. The word barely made it past Jaewon's lips. He snatched the child up, turned and ran. Min-Suk's legs wouldn't move. His alpha roared. His world had just rewritten itself in a yellow raincoat and storm-gray eyes. He had a son. Min-Suk's paralysis lasted exactly 4 seconds. For seconds where his nervous system tried to reconcile chemical suppression with biological imperative, where his alpha bellowed and his pride fractured and the truth detonated through every synapse. Then his legs moved. Jaewon. But his ex-wife was already gone, swallowed by the evening commuter crush pouring toward the platform. Min-Suk shoved through the crowd, his security detail scrambling behind him, and caught a flash of yellow raincoat disappearing down the corridor toward the exit. Stop! Wait! A businessman stepped into his path. Min-Suk nearly knocked him sideways, his control slipping, pheromones leaking past the suppressant wall in a rolling wave of alpha dominance that made 3 people stumble back instinctively. Sir! One of his guards tried to keep pace. What's happening? Min-Suk didn't answer. Couldn't. His hindbrain had taken over, tracking scent through recycled air and human sweat, following the spike of terror-laced lavender like a beacon. He rounded the corner and saw them, Jaewon clutching the boy against his chest, moving fast but hindered by the child's weight, heading for the street-level stairs. Jaewon, please, I just want to talk. Jaewon whipped around, and Min-Suk nearly crashed into a vending machine, stopping short. His Omega's face was sheet white, eyes blown wide with panic, and his scent was screaming. The defensive spike of an Omega protecting his young, acrid and sharp enough to cut. Stay away from us. Jaewon's voice shook. I swear to God, Min-Suk, stay away. Is that my? Min-Suk's throat closed around the word. Is he? No. Jaewon backed up the stairs, one hand cradling the boy's head against his shoulder, blocking the child's view. No, you don't get to do this. Yama. The small voice was muffled against Jaewon's coat. Why are we running? It's okay, baby. It's okay, we're just. A train announcement blared overhead. The crowd shifted, a surge of people flooding up from the platform, and Jaewon used it. He turned and bolted up the remaining stairs, disappearing into the street-level exit. Min-Suk lunged after him, taking the steps 3 at a time, his heart a hammer against his ribs. He burst onto the street and his head snapped left, right, scanning. There. Half a block down, Jaewon was pulling the boy into a silver sedan, old and slightly rusted, nothing like the cars Min-Suk had once insisted his Omega use. The child was crying now, high frightened sounds that made Min-Suk's alpha want to tear the world apart, and also drop to the ground in submission because he was the threat. He was the thing making his pup cry. Jaewon. He started running. The sedan's engine coughed to life. Jaewon's face appeared in the driver's window for a fraction of a second. Tears streaming, lips moving in what might have been a curse or a prayer, and then the car lurched into traffic. Min-Suk reached the curb as the sedan's taillights disappeared around the corner. Gone. He stood there, chest heaving, his suppressants utterly useless against the tidal wave of pheromones his body was dumping into his bloodstream. Passers-by gave him a wide berth, some looking concerned, others frightened by the uncontrolled alpha presence rolling off him in waves. His security team caught up, Kangdae breathing hard. Sir, what the hell? Who was that? Min-Suk's hands were shaking. His whole body was shaking. 3 years of careful numbness, 3 years of chemical control, and it had all disintegrated in the space of a yellow raincoat and storm-gray eyes. Get me a trace on that vehicle. His voice came out raw. License plate, registration, everything. I want to know where it goes, where it's been, and who owns it. Sir. Now Kangdae. The beta pulled out his phone, already dialing. Min-Suk stared at the empty street where his son, had vanished, and felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in 3 years. Absolute, crushing loss. And beneath it, waking up with feral certainty. The hunt had just begun. The manila folder landed on Min-Suk's desk at 3 in the morning. He hadn't slept. Hadn't tried. The suppressants sat untouched in their bottle while his alpha paced beneath his skin like a caged animal that had finally remembered what freedom tasted like. Kangdae looked worse than Min-Suk felt. Found them. Apartment in Nowon-gu, registered under a Lee Min-jun, her brother, we think. The sedans registered to the same address. Current location? Playground. About 15 minutes from the apartment. Kangdae hesitated. Sir, what exactly are we? I'm going. Min-Suk was already reaching for his coat. You can't just approach them. After yesterday, if he sees you again. I know. Min-Suk's jaw tightened. Which is why he won't see me. 20 minutes later, Min-Suk sat on a bench across from Nowon Children's Park, wearing clothes he'd pulled from his building's lost and found. A nondescript black jacket, baseball cap pulled low, cheap sunglasses that his team had picked up from a convenience store. He looked like any other tired salary man stealing a moment's peace. But every cell in his body was locked onto the playground. The boy, Asterisk his son asterisk was at the top of the slide, yellow raincoat traded for a blue sweatshirt with a dinosaur on it. Jaewon stood nearby, looking exhausted in the gray morning light, his attention split between the child and his phone. Yama, watch. Watch me. I'm watching, Hanola. Be careful. Hanol, Sky. Min-Suk's chest constricted around the name he'd had no part in choosing. The boy, Hanol, slid down with a shriek of delight, landed in the sand, and immediately ran back to do it again. His movements were uncoordinated in the way of toddlers, all enthusiasm and no awareness of his own center of gravity. An older child pushed past him on the ladder. Hanol stumbled. Min-Suk was halfway off the bench before conscious thought caught up with instinct. He forced himself still, every muscle locked, as Hanol's small body tilted sideways and crashed into the sand at the slide's base. The cry was immediate and piercing. Hanol! Jaewon dropped his phone and ran, dropping to his knees beside the boy. Where does it hurt? Let me see. My mouth! Hanol wailed, hand pressed to his mouth, tears streaming. Yama, my mouth! Jaewon gently pulled the small hand away, examined his son's face, and his shoulders relaxed slightly. It's okay, baby. You just lost a tooth. See? It was already loose, remember? It hurts. I know. Come here. Jaewon pulled Hanol into his arms, scenting him with automatic comfort, and Min-Suk watched his Omega do what came naturally, soothe, protect, gentle the pain of a child Min-Suk had never held. The ache in his chest was physical. Where's the tooth? Hanol's crying had downgraded to hiccuping sniffles. I want my tooth. It's probably in the sand. We'll look, okay? They searched for a minute, Jaewon's movements increasingly half-hearted while Hanol crawled around the slide's base. Finally Jaewon sighed. Baby, I think it's gone. But that's okay. The tooth fairy doesn't need the actual tooth, she just knows. But I want it. Fresh tears threatened. Tell you what. Jaewon hoisted Hanol onto his hip with visible effort. We'll go get ice cream for your mouth, and then we'll come back and look again later. Deal? Chocolate ice cream? Yes, you little negotiator. Chocolate. They left hand in hand, Hanol still occasionally touching his mouth with wonder and residual distress. Min-Suk waited until they'd disappeared around the corner, counted to 60, then moved. He crossed to the playground, scanned the sand beneath the slide, and dropped to a crouch. His hands sifted through the fine grains with methodical precision. There, a tiny piece of white among the tan and gray. Min-Suk plucked the baby tooth from the sand and held it up to the light. It was impossibly small, barely bigger than a grain of rice, still faintly pink at the root. His son's tooth. His hands shook as he wrapped it carefully in his pocket square. Across the playground, a young mother watched him with suspicion. Min-Suk stood, nodded politely, and walked away before she could question why a grown man was collecting teeth from the sand. He had what he needed. By tonight, he'd have scientific confirmation of what his alpha already knew with absolute certainty. And then the real hunt would begin. Before I tell you what happened to her, subscribe to Heartverse BL and comment where you're watching from. The lab director called at 4:47 a.m. Min-Suk answered before the first ring finished. Mr. Kong, the results are ready. I'm sending them now. Min-Suk's laptop chimed. He opened the encrypted file with hands that had negotiated billion-won deals without trembling, but now barely managed to click the mouse. The document loaded. Rows of genetic markers, percentages, technical language that blurred together until his eyes found the single line that mattered. Probability of paternity, 99.99%. The world tilted. He had a son. Not a possibility, not a suspicion, but a confirmed scientific fact. Hanol, the boy with storm-gray eyes and his own stubborn jawline, was his child. His pup. The heir he'd never known existed. Mr. Kong? Are you there? Yes. His voice sounded distant to his own ears. Thank you. Delete all records of this test. Already done, sir. Min-Suk ended the call and sat motionless in his office chair, staring at the percentage that had just rewritten his entire existence. 3 years. Jaewon had been pregnant when Min-Suk threw him out, and he'd raised their son alone while Min-Suk had numbed himself with suppressants and spreadsheets. His phone rang again. Kongdae this time. We have a problem. Min-Suk's alpha instincts sharpened. Talk. The scent evidence from the divorce. I had our forensics team re-examine the shirt. The one that supposedly proved infidelity. Kongdae's voice was tight. It was engineered, sir. Synthetic pheromones layered over the Omega's natural scent. Professional grade, the kind that requires lab access. The air left Min-Suk's lungs in a rush. What? There's a purchase order. 3 years ago, 2 weeks before the divorce. Ordered by Usiri and billed to her personal account. Siri, his half-cousin. The beta who'd brought him the shirt with tears in her eyes, who'd held his hand and whispered that she was sorry. So sorry to be the one to tell him. But she'd found it in Jaewon's gym bag and thought he deserved to know the truth. The truth. The manufactured, calculated, engineered lie that had destroyed his marriage. Where is she? Min-Suk's voice dropped to something subvocal and dangerous. Her office. But sir, there's something else. Kangdae hesitated. We flagged financial activity on CO Jaewon's accounts like you asked. He purchased 2 bus tickets this morning. Destination. Busan. Departing in 48 hours. But that's not the final destination. He's got connecting documents for a ferry to Japan. And from there, Kangdae exhaled. Sir, he's running. New identity documents. Work visa application for Canada. This isn't a trip. It's an extraction. 48 hours. Min-Suk stood so fast his chair crashed backward. His pheromones spiked, flooding the office with alpha command so thick it would have sent any omega within range to their knees. Get me everything on Siri. Bank records, communications, every lie she's ever told. I want her destroyed. Sir. And track Jaewon. Every movement. If he so much as looks at that bus terminal early, I want to know. Min-Suk was already moving toward his private elevator. Schedule an emergency board meeting for tonight. Siri's about to lose everything she thought she'd gained. And after that, Min-Suk looked at the DNA report still glowing on his screen. 99.99%. A son who called someone else's name when he fell. An omega who'd fled in terror at the sight of him. 48 hours to fix 3 years of catastrophic failure. After that, Min-Suk said quietly, I'm getting my family back. The elevator doors closed on a man who'd just declared war on his own pride, his cousin, and time itself. And this time, he would not fail. Siri was already seated when Min-Suk entered the executive boardroom. She looked up from her tablet with practiced surprise, her beta scent carefully neutral. Jasmine and something astringent, professional and unthreatening. Min-Suk, I thought this was a standard quarterly review. Why the emergency session? He didn't answer. Just walked to the head of the table where 15 board members sat in various states of confusion, placed a manila folder on the polished surface, and let his pheromones leak. Not a flood. Just enough to make every person in the room understand that something feral and dangerous had entered the space. 3 years ago, Min-Suk said quietly, someone brought me evidence of infidelity. A shirt that carried another alpha's scent mixed with my omegas. Evidence that destroyed my marriage. He opened the folder. That evidence was fabricated. Siri's face remained perfectly composed. Min-Suk, what are you talking about? Synthetic pheromones. Lab-grade scent engineering. He slid the forensic report across the table. Purchased under your name 2 weeks before my divorce. Billed to your personal account. The room went silent. Several board members leaned forward, reading the document as it passed between them. Siri's jasmine scent soured slightly. Just a fractional shift that Min-Suk's alpha caught immediately. That's ridiculous. Why would I? Because you wanted him gone. Min-Suk's voice was surgical. An omega mate was a liability to your ambitions. You thought with Jaewon out of the picture, you'd secure your position as my primary advisor. My heir apparent. This is insane. Siri stood, her chair scraping back. I brought you that evidence because I cared about you. Because I didn't want you humiliated. You brought me a lie. Min-Suk pulled out another document. And then you watched me throw out my pregnant omega based on that lie. The word pregnant rippled through the room like a shockwave. Siri's face finally cracked. Just for a second, surprise flickering through before her mask reassembled. You didn't know about the child, Min-Suk continued, his tone conversational and absolutely lethal. That must have been frustrating. All that careful manipulation, and you still didn't account for the one thing that would bring me back. Min-Suk, please. Siri's voice took on a pleading edge. Whatever you think happened. I don't think. I know. He pressed the intercom. Send them in. The boardroom doors opened. 2 representatives from the Seoul Pack Council entered, their formal robes marking them as adjudicators. Behind them, a lawyer Min-Suk had retained specifically for this moment. Park Council member Hwang spoke first, her omega authority carrying weight that made even the Alpha board members straighten. You Siri, You've been accused of beta interference in a bonded pair's relationship through artificial scent manipulation. How do you answer? Series scent spiked, fear, bitter, and sharp. This is a corporate matter, not a PAC issue. Scent fraud is a criminal offense under PAC law, Huang said coldly. Especially when it results in the dissolution of a mating bond and abandonment of a pup. I didn't know about any pup. Irrelevant. Min-Suk's hands were flat on the table, holding himself back from something more violent. You interfered. You lied. You engineered the destruction of my family. The room held its breath. Effective immediately, Min-Suk said. You're removed from all positions within this company. Your shares revert to corporate holding. Your PAC status will be reviewed by the council, and I'm personally filing criminal charges for fraud, manipulation, and conspiracy. Siri's face went white. You can't, Min-Suk, we're family. You stopped being family the moment you chose ambition over truth. He nodded to security waiting at the door. Get her out. They moved efficiently. Siri's protests faded down the hallway, her jasmine-scent trail turning acrid with panic and rage. Council member Huang gathered her documents. We'll need your full statement. Tonight. After. Min-Suk glanced at his watch and his heart dropped. 2 hours. The confrontation had consumed 2 hours he didn't have. After? Huang prompted. After I stopped my son from leaving the country. He was already moving toward the door. Kangdae. His assistant appeared, phone already out. Sir, CO Jaewon just withdrew cash from an ATM in Nowon. Large amount. Min-Suk's alpha roared. 46 hours left, and Jaewon was already preparing to run. He'd burned Siri to ash, but the cost was time he couldn't afford to lose. The Daejin Motors acquisition contract sat in front of Min-Suk, 20 pages that represented the largest corporate merger in Korea's security industry. $2.3 billion. 18 months of negotiation. The deal that would make his company untouchable. CEO Park's pen was poised over the signature line. Shall we? Min-Suk's phone vibrated. Kangdae's message flashed across the screen. Asterisk Jaewon at Terminal 4. Buying tickets. It's happening now. Asterisk. Not in 46 hours. Now. Mr. Kong. Park's smile was starting to strain. Is everything all right? The boardroom held 12 people. Lawyers, executives, the entire infrastructure of corporate power waiting on his word. Outside, rain hammered the windows. The weather report had called it a monsoon warning, flooding already starting in Gangnam's lower streets. Min-Suk stood. I need to leave. Silence crashed through the room like a physical force. I'm sorry. Park's pen stopped moving. We're in the middle of. I know what we're in the middle of. Min-Suk was already reaching for his jacket. Kangdae will handle the signatures. He has full authorization. Mr. Kong, this is a $2 billion deal. Park stood as well, his face reddening. You can't just walk out. I can. Min-Suk met his eyes. And I am. His lawyer grabbed his arm. Min-Suk, if you leave now, they could pull the entire offer. Everything we've worked for. Doesn't matter. What could possibly be more important than? My son. The words came out raw. My son is more important. He pulled free and walked toward the door. Behind him, Park's voice rose in outrage. His own lawyer was speed-dialing someone, and the carefully constructed deal was probably collapsing in real time. Min-Suk didn't look back. The elevator couldn't move fast enough. He took the stairs instead, hitting the parking garage at a run, his pheromones starting to leak in waves that made 2 employees flatten themselves against the wall. Sir! His driver scrambled out of the town car. I'll take you. No time. Min-Suk threw himself into his personal vehicle. A black Range Rover he rarely drove himself. The engine roared to life, and he peeled out of the garage into sheets of rain. The GPS estimated 40 minutes to Terminal 4. Min-Suk made it a personal mission to cut that in half. Traffic was chaos. The monsoon had turned streets into rivers, cars crawling through water that reached halfway up their wheels. Min-Suk didn't slow. He took side streets, ignored traffic signals, and let his alpha instincts navigate with single-minded focus. His phone rang. He answered on speaker. Sir, the deal. Park is threatening to walk. His lawyer's voice was frantic. Let him walk. Min-Suk, you're not thinking clearly. I'm thinking perfectly clearly. He swerved around a stalled taxi, water spraying. For the first time in 3 years, I'm thinking clearly. This will cost you billions. I don't care. His hands were white-knuckled on the steering wheel. I have a son who doesn't know my name and an omega who runs when he sees me. The money means nothing. He ended the call. The streets blurred past. Rain hammered the windshield faster than the wipers could clear it. Min-Suk's pheromones filled the vehicle's interior, dread and desperation, and alpha command with nowhere to go but inward, eating him alive. Kongdae called. They're at gate 7. Bus boards in 12 minutes. I'm 8 minutes out. Sir, the flooding, you can't possibly. Min-Suk floored the accelerator through an intersection where water had risen to the curb line. The Range Rover hydroplaned for a heart-stopping second before the tires caught. 6 minutes, he growled. Terminal 4 appeared through the rain like a concrete fortress. Min-Suk abandoned the car in a no-parking zone, not bothering to cut the engine, and ran. The terminal was chaos, delayed passengers, crying children, the loudspeaker announcing weather delays. Min-Suk's alpha presence cut through the crowd like a blade. People moved aside without conscious thought, their hindbrains recognizing a predator on the hunt. Gate 7. There. Through the glass doors, at the outside platform where buses idled, he saw them. Jaewon clutching Hanol's hand, 2 small bags at their feet, standing in the rain beside a bus with its engine running. Boarding had started. Min-Suk shoved through the doors into the downpour, rain soaking him instantly, and his voice came out. Not a shout, but an alpha command that carried over the storm. Jaewon. His omega turned, eyes going wide with shock and terror. And Min-Suk dropped to his knees on the flooded concrete. Before I tell you what happened to her, subscribe to Heartverse BL, and comment where you're watching from. The rain hammered down like judgment. Min-Suk's knees hit concrete already flooded with 2 inches of water, the impact sending a shock through his bones that he barely felt. His suit was ruined within seconds, hair plastered to his skull, but none of it mattered. Jaewon stood frozen 10 feet away, his hand gripping Hanol so tightly the boy whimpered. The omega's scent spiked, lavender curdling into pure terror, the defensive pheromone wall of a parent whose child was threatened. Get away from us. Jaewon's voice shook. Min-Suk, I swear to God. I'm not here to take him. Min-Suk's hands were flat on his thighs, the posture of absolute non-aggression. I'm not here to fight you. Then why? Jaewon's eyes darted to the bus, its engine rumbling, driver waiting. How did you even? I know everything. The words came out ragged. I know about Hanol. I know about Siri. I know what I did to you. Behind Jaewon, other passengers were boarding, shooting nervous glances at the alpha kneeling in the rain. The bus driver leaned out. Sir, we're departing in 2 minutes. Don't get on that bus. Min-Suk's voice cracked. Please. Just give me 5 minutes. I gave you 3 years. Jaewon's composure shattered. 3 years you could have looked for us, could have questioned what you believed, but you were too proud, too certain. I know. You threw me out. Tears mixed with rain on Jaewon's face. I was pregnant and terrified, and you looked at me like I was nothing. I know. Min-Suk's throat worked. I know what I did. The shirt, the evidence Siri brought me, it was fake. Synthetic pheromones. Lab-engineered to smell like another alpha. Jaewon's breath caught. What? She fabricated everything. Bought the scent compounds, planted them, and Min-Suk's voice broke completely. I believed her. I believed her instead of you. I threw out my pregnant mate because I was too proud to question, too weak to trust the bond. The rain poured harder. Hanol had started crying, confused and frightened by the shouting and his Yama's distress. Jaewon pulled him closer, scent marking frantically. Yama, I'm scared. It's okay, baby. It's okay. He looks like me. Min-Suk's eyes fixed on his son, the storm-gray eyes, the jawline, the way he clutched his omega parent with fierce protective instinct even at 3 years old. His eyes. His face. He's mine. He's mine. Jaewon's voice turned feral. I raised him alone. I worked 3 jobs to keep him fed. You don't get to claim. I know I don't. Min-Suk tilted his head back. The movement was deliberate, unmistakable. He exposed his throat fully, the column of his neck vulnerable to the rain, and more importantly, the scent gland visible just below his jaw. The gland that marked him as alpha, that should never be offered unguarded, that an omega's bite could claim or scar or destroy. It was the ultimate submission. An alpha bearing his throat was a creature stripped of every defense, offering his life. Gasps came from the watching passengers. Even the bus driver looked shocked. Jaewon's eyes went wide. What are you? I'm begging. Min-Suk's voice was barely audible over the storm. I'm on my knees in the rain, baring my throat, begging you not to take my son away before I even get to know his favorite color. Min-Suk, I destroyed us. I took a beta's lie over my omega's truth. I threw you out when you were carrying my pup. His hands trembled. I lived in a glass cage for 3 years, numbing myself with suppressants because feeling the broken bond was unbearable, and I deserved that pain. I deserve all of it. The rain streamed down his exposed throat. One bite. Jaewon could end him with one claim bite delivered in rage instead of love. But he doesn't deserve to grow up without a father who wants him. Min-Suk's eyes burned. Hanol doesn't deserve to pay for my sins. So I'm begging you, not as an alpha, not as the head of some company, as a man who lost everything that mattered. Jaewon stood shaking, tears streaming. You can't fix 3 years with one speech. I know, but I can start. Min-Suk's throat worked around the words. Give me a chance to try. Please. I'll do anything. The bus driver called out. Sir, we have to go. Jaewon looked at the bus. At Min-Suk kneeling in the flood. At their son crying against his side. And his hand slowly released the bus tickets. They fluttered into the water, ink already running. The apartment Min-Suk secured was in Mapo-gu, neutral territory, neither his sterile penthouse nor Jaewon's cramped studio. 2 bedrooms, a small kitchen, ground floor access with a garden Hanol could see from the windows. He'd paid 6 months up front and put only Jaewon's name on the lease. It's yours, he said as Jaewon stood in the doorway, Hanol hidden behind his legs. No strings. If you tell me to leave right now, I'll go, and it's still yours. Jaewon's lavender scent was spiked with anxiety, his omega instincts screaming that this was a trap, that alphas didn't just give without taking. Why? Because you need to feel safe. Min-Suk kept his distance, a full 3 meters back. And you can't feel safe if I control the space. It took Jaewon 20 minutes to walk through the apartment, checking locks, windows, exits. Min-Suk waited in the living room, hands visible, pheromones suppressed as much as his battered control could manage. Finally, Jaewon returned. What are your expectations? To see him. To be in the same room. Min-Suk's eyes flicked to Hanol, who was peeking around the doorframe with wide, uncertain eyes. To learn his favorite dinosaur. That's all. And if I say no overnight visits, then no overnight visits. Jaewon studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Okay, trial basis. 2 weeks. That first week, Min-Suk learned what it meant to be untrusted. He arrived each morning at 8, per Jaewon's instructions, and left each evening at 6. He sat where Jaewon told him to sit, spoke when spoken to, and moved slowly enough that his son wouldn't startle. Hanol watched him like a wary animal, pressed against Jaewon's side, scenting his omega parent every few minutes for reassurance. On day 3, Min-Suk brought a toy, a plush dinosaur, green and overstuffed. Hanol, he said quietly, crouching down to the boy's level. Do you like dinosaurs? Hanol's little hands tightened on Jaewon's shirt. Didn't answer. It's okay. Min-Suk set the toy on the floor between them. You don't have to talk to me. I just thought, your shirt has a dinosaur, so maybe. He trailed off, feeling more helpless than he'd ever felt negotiating hostile corporate takeovers. Jaewon's hand rested on Hanol's head. What do you say, baby? Thank you. The small voice was barely a whisper. Progress. On day 5, Min-Suk asked if he could stay for dinner. Jaewon's scent spiked immediately, fear and uncertainty rolling off him in waves. But he nodded. The meal was awkward. Hanol kept staring at Min-Suk with those storm-gray eyes that were a mirror of his own, and Jaewon barely ate, his body language screaming flight or fight. You don't have to be afraid of me, Min-Suk said quietly. Don't I? Jaewon's voice was sharp. You're an alpha who thinks he owns what he claims. How do I know you won't just? He glanced at Hanol and cut himself off. You don't know. Min-Suk set down his fork. I can't give you proof. Only time. Only showing up and doing what I say I'll do. That night, Jaewon asked if Min-Suk wanted to help put Hanol to bed. It should have been simple. But when Min-Suk read the bedtime story, something about a bear and a moon, his voice came out too rough, too commanding, and Hanol started crying. No. Too loud. Iyama reads it soft. Min-Suk froze, stricken. Jaewon swept Hanol up immediately, scent marking and soothing, and Min-Suk felt his control fracture. I'm sorry. I don't know how to do this. Jaewon looked at him over their son's head, and something in his expression softened microscopically. Then learn. So Min-Suk learned. He learned that Hanol liked his toast cut in triangles, not squares. That he needed his green blanket to sleep, and that he had nightmares about monsters under the bed. He learned that Jaewon still flinched when Min-Suk moved too quickly, that his Omega kept a kitchen knife under his pillow in the master bedroom, and that trust wasn't given. It was earned in increments so small they were almost invisible. On day 9, Hanol fell asleep during a movie, his small body curled against the sofa. "Should I carry him?" Min-Suk asked quietly. Jaewon hesitated, then nodded. Min-Suk lifted his son for the first time. Hanol was warm and heavy with sleep, his scent milky and sweet and utterly perfect. Min-Suk's alpha wanted to roar with possessive joy, but he locked it down, walked slowly to the bedroom, and laid Hanol in bed with movements so gentle they trembled. "Good night," he whispered. "Sleep well, Hanola." Behind him, Jaewon stood in the doorway watching. When Min-Suk turned, there were tears on his Omega's face. "What?" Min-Suk froze. "Nothing. Jaewon wiped his eyes. "He's never let anyone but me put him to bed." Something cracked open in Min-Suk's chest. Not pride, not possession, just overwhelming, terrifying love for a child he barely knew and an Omega he'd destroyed. "Thank you," he said hoarsely, "for letting me try." Jaewon didn't answer. But that night, the kitchen knife stayed in the drawer. 6 months later, Min-Suk woke to the scent of lavender and honey soaked into his pillows and the sound of small feet thundering down the hallway. "Appa! Appa, wake up!" The word still hit him in the chest every single time. Appa. His son called him Appa now, had been calling him that for 2 months, ever since the day Hanol had fallen off the playground equipment and Min-Suk had caught him midair with reflexes honed by years of combat training. Min-Suk sat up just as his bedroom door crashed open. Hanol stood in the doorway wearing dinosaur pajamas and an expression of pure panic. "Appa, I made a mistake." "What kind of mistake?" Min-Suk was already moving, his alpha instincts cataloging threats even as his conscious mind noted that Hanol smelled fine. No blood, no fear, just the slightly guilty scent of a pup who'd gotten into something he shouldn't have. A big mistake. With bubbles. From the bathroom down the hall, Jaewon's voice called out in exasperation. "Hanola, I told you not to pour the whole bottle. Oh my God, Min-Suk, don't just stand there, help." Min-Suk reached the bathroom and stopped dead. Bubbles. Everywhere. A cascade of foam was pouring out of the bathtub like a washing machine had detonated, covering the tile floor in a layer 6 inches deep and still rising. Hanol's bath toys floated in the chaos, plastic boats and rubber dinosaurs riding waves of soap. Jaewon stood in the middle of it, barefoot and soaked, his sleep shirt clinging to his frame, holding the empty economy-sized bottle of bubble bath with an expression caught between fury and helpless laughter. "He said he wanted a bubble bath," Jaewon said weakly. "I told him 2 capfuls. I thought more bubbles would be more fun." Hanol's lower lip trembled. "Are you mad, Yama?" "Aye." Jaewon looked at the foam still multiplying, at his pup's worried face, at Min-Suk standing in the doorway, and something broke. He started laughing. Deep, uncontrolled laughter that made his whole body shake, the kind of laughter that held no edges of pain or fear. Just pure, ridiculous joy. Min-Suk felt his heart stop and restart. He'd heard Jaewon laugh before, in the early days of their marriage, but never like this. Never this free. "Okay," Min-Suk said, rolling up his sleeves. "Emergency bubble protocol. Hanol, you're on toy rescue. Save the dinosaurs." "Yes, Appa." Hanol dove into the foam with a delighted shriek. "Jaewon, turn off the water before we flood the entire apartment." "Already did." Jaewon was still giggling, wiping tears from his eyes. "This is insane. We're going to be cleaning bubbles for days." "Probably." Min-Suk waded into the bathroom, bubbles reaching his knees, and started scooping foam into the tub. But he's having the time of his life. Hanol surfaced from the bubbles holding a toy stegosaurus above his head like a trophy. "I found Spike." They worked for 20 minutes, the 3 of them covered in soap, Hanol helping by mostly just playing in the foam while Min-Suk and Jaewon actually dealt with the disaster. At some point, Hanol dumped a handful of bubbles on Min-Suk's head, and instead of commanding or correcting, Min-Suk just scooped up his own handful and gently deposited it on his son's hair. Hanol's delighted squeal could probably be heard 3 floors down. Finally, with the worst of the flood contained and Hanol distracted by his rescued toys, Jaewon sagged against the bathroom counter. Min-Suk moved beside him, close but not touching, always letting Jaewon control the distance. "You know," Jaewon said quietly, 6 months ago I had a kitchen knife under my pillow and a plane ticket out of the country. "I know. And now I'm standing in a bathroom full of bubbles with an alpha who just let our son dump soap on his head." Jaewon turned to look at him, And his scent, God, his scent was lavender and honey without a single note of fear. How did we get here? You let me try. Min-Suk's voice was rough. You gave me a chance I didn't deserve, and you let me learn. Jaewon reached out slowly, telegraphing the movement, and touched Min-Suk's jaw. His fingers were damp and smelled like soap, and Min-Suk held perfectly still, barely breathing. I think. Jaewon's thumb brushed the scent gland on Min-Suk's throat, the one he'd bared in the rain 6 months ago. I think maybe you've earned more than just a chance. Min-Suk's heart slammed against his ribs. Jaewon, ask me. Ask you what? Jaewon's eyes were steady, certain in a way they hadn't been since before the divorce. Ask me if you can court me properly. Ask me if I'll let you be my alpha again. Min-Suk's hands were shaking. Will you? Let me court you. Let me prove every day that I choose you, that I choose our family. Jaewon kissed him. It was soft, tentative, tasting like soap and tears and 6 months of careful healing. And when Jaewon's lips traveled to Min-Suk's throat, to the gland that pulsed with alpha pheromones no longer numbed by suppressants, and bit down gently. Not breaking skin yet, just a promise. Min-Suk's alpha roared with something that wasn't possession or dominance. Just love. Overwhelming, terrifying, finally safe love. Yama? Appa? Are you kissing? They broke apart to find Hanul watching them with fascinated curiosity, a bubble beard clinging to his chin. Jaewon laughed again, that free, unbroken sound, and pulled their son into a hug that included Min-Suk. Yeah, baby. We're kissing. Gross, Hanul pronounced. Then, thoughtfully, can we have pancakes? Min-Suk looked at his omega and his pup, both covered in soap, both smelling like home, and felt his dangerous, lonely cage finally shatter completely. Yeah, he said hoarsely. We can have pancakes.